Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not to Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Superman and Lois. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, we are picking up in the aftermath of, the entire Kent family's together. Lois is cooking breakfast, and obviously it's still kind of that adjustment period of having John and Natalie over. Obviously, it didn't go well. Well, it wasn't a failure. It's just like, Natalie's a vegetarian, so kind of strike one there. But I do love that John's telling her later on, it's like, all you have to do is be yourself. Just get to know Natalie, you know? Because it's just a thing of Lois is kind of trying to rush things a little bit. It's kind of going to be an adjustment period for both you and her. You, for someone who looks at you like you're her mom when you don't know her. And for her, you kind of see like the daughter that you never had. And, so it's going to take some time. But during the whole thing, Clark starts having another vision again, and it collapses. And like I said before, I was wondering if it was a Zod situation, and even he started thinking that, because it seems like no one else is displaying these same symptoms except for him, because there was plenty of other people who had Kryptonians in them, but to be fair, him and Jordan, they're the only ones who are Kryptonians who actually had another, other than Morgan. So later on, he ends up confiding in everyone about it, but it's like, why didn't you say it? It's like, Lois was dealing with a lot already on her plate. He didn't want to add more to it. So he ends up going to the one person he knows could give him answers. I was like, is he going to go to Leslie? He's like, none other than Morgan, live and well, and now potentially all his powers have been burnt out and he's just a human. And so it's like, right, take me to my fortune. He's like, yeah, bro, I'm not going to listen to you. It's like, I'll see you soon, brother. You'll eventually come crawling back, which he has no choice but to when he ends up trying to stop a crime and a guy starts inhaling himself. But the moment he started inhaling, I was like, that looks like that was some ex-kryptonite, and lo and behold, it is. So that particular guy has been selling it on the black market. It's like, people want to have superpowers. So that, to me, I always think that's such an interesting thing. Like, I always thought that'd make an interesting story of just like, selling essentially superpowers in the form of drugs. There's actually a video game called Galarians. If you've never played it, it's like a PlayStation game, and there was like a sequel that was a PlayStation 2 game. Basically, you inject yourself with these drugs after being experimented on, and these drugs basically let you do, like, psychic abilities, like pyrokinesis and telekinesis. It's a whole thing. I always thought that was just kind of an interesting thing, and just the thinking a superhero universe. And maybe this is a thing that's probably already happened in the comics and stuff, but selling a drug that basically gives people superpower. I mean, hell, there's a whole movie about that on Netflix, based around that premise. I'm blanking on the movie's name right now, but it had Jamie Foxx. Regardless. The guy was taken down, but it wasn't by Clark. The guy, obviously Clark wasn't on his A game and got laid out. But Anderson's Super Squad shows up, and lo and behold, who's amongst the Super Squad? Tag. I was like, I should have figured as much. Because once again, this is about the place that he was sent to, so... But obviously Clark had reservations about that because, Tag's barely 18, and he's like, pretty fat. It's like, the fact is he's willing to send kids out there. God forbid if he ever finds out about your son having powers, he'd probably try to milk that situation. It'd be a different circumstances, but it's like, nah, let him come to this school, what we're training these superheroes up, and he'll be able to, that means, because Tag had his belief at the time that Jordan had something to do with him getting powers. If he said anything to anybody, there would have been something done to Jordan before now. They probably would have approached him, but that doesn't mean that still won't potentially be a possibility in the future. So, but he might try and, because the thing is, if he finds out about Jordan, he might find, because it might be okay, he might come to Clark and Lois being like, yes, your son has been displaying abilities. We don't know how he got them, yada, yada, yada. It might be that thing. But I'm sure Sam keeps, Jordan, at least kept Jordan super off the radar so that no one in the government or anything knows about that, protecting his family and whatnot. So Clark doesn't know what's going on with him, and obviously neither do they, which I love that he's like, what's the point of keeping Kryptonian experts on the payroll when they don't really do their job, because even though they can't explain anything. But I love that he's just either you're with us or you're not. If you're not with us, then you'll have to continue on your own, which I'm like, I I guess I was about to say, it's like, well, he's kind of been doing this kind of on his own for a little while anyway, but it's like, well, I guess after a while he eventually got military backing, but it's like, right. And you're more of a liability than a hero right now. So Clark had no choice but to turn to his brother, and he ended up getting Jordan tagging along, summoning basically like the Jor-El version of their mom, which I guess, like, right, the Jor-El crystal is broken, so I guess now he gets to have, I guess his mom is going to be, Laura is going to be filling that role now, like, as the guidance, even though he's had his dad guiding him for years, which once again is just like depressing. It's like, right, you lost Jor-El, you lost John, you lost Martha, you still have now you have this version of your mom, which I'm like, he did have a moment with her last season, but it's like, right, this is a different version. This is a recorded version of her before Krypton's destruction. So everything that was connected to the Eradicator, like any of her consciousness there, is gone, and that's not the same thing. So that's like just like Jor-El was like a Jor-El before the explosion and stuff like that. So I'm sure he probably kept that super secret from his dad, that he had that, because his dad wouldn't have been too happy at all that he had that. So, and I think it's really interesting that this episode also kind of got into some of the Krypton stuff that, like, maybe it came up in Man of Steel, because I've seen Man of Steel twice, but it's been a while. I definitely know it came up in Krypton about how, like, babies are born on Krypton, like, it's more of a genetic, like, oh, we come together, and it's not like a human thing of pregnancy, it's more so like we put your genetic codes together and we basically make a baby genetically. But that's what makes Clark so special, because he was like the literal last son of Krypton, because he was biologically born, whereas everyone else was manufactured, which is obviously going to like have some insecurities, especially because it's like, right, because she's like, oh, who's this guy? And it's like, because she immediately recognized her own son, but didn't recognize Tall. It's like, oh, of course you wouldn't. It's like, oh my god, I'm so glad you made it off of Krypton. It's like, yeah, no thanks to you. And she's like, I had no idea what was going to happen. Like, I tried to do everything, but your father, and he's like, you talk about these walls and yada, yada, yada. You just didn't love me enough. And it's like, oh, knowing at the heart of it all, you have mom and dad issues. Understandably, your dad was, we know, verbally and physically abusive to you, because he even says, like, you know what the pain that man put me through, and it's because of you. It's like, you'll go above and beyond for your son, but not me. Especially because in Tall's eyes, it's like, Clark, Kal-El is the weaker one. He's the weak son. I was made strong, but it doesn't matter. You still love and protect, because he's the child you had yourself, whereas I was made, you know? Sad that that he kind of has that perspective, and nothing his mother could ever say was enough to reach him. But it turns out he was also faking. Like, yeah, I have my superpowers the entire time. I've been faking it, just waiting for an opportunity. And I love Jordan getting in his way. He's like, I told you, leave him alone. And he was like, oh, we've been through this before, nephew. But Jordan has leveled up a little bit, so going toe-to-toe with Morgan, but still lost. And I don't know if this was what they were kind of aiming for. Him having him in that headlock almost made me go, oh, it feels very Man of Steel-ish, you know, the whole Clark and Zod situation. It seemed a little reminiscent of that. But his mom, Laura, being like, you don't have to do this. You're not your father. Like, I know that there's good in you. And I love that when Clark, like, snapped out of him, he was like, get away from him. Don't you ever touch him. And it's just like, I don't know why. Like, it's just because I think it's so neat. Because it's like, right, Superman's one of those heroes, like, if he doesn't control himself, Clark could lose control, and that's a very bad thing. And just seeing him wailing on Morgan, just how angry he can get. Like, we've seen instances of that in season 1. It's just like, it's always badass moments like, oh, whoa, like, you know, even Laura had to stop him. And he was just like, don't ever touch him again. And I was like, dude, just seeing him that angry and just like, because usually he has to be the calm, cool, and collected hero. But, I mean, once again, he is just as much human as he is Kryptonian, because he's grown up at humans for decades, that, you know, that human heart has kind of gotten to him. And, like, he lets his emotions get the best of him, but he tries to keep them in check, especially because their powers are tied to their emotions. So luckily Jordan's okay, but his mom ended up figuring out what was happening, because at the same time you have Lois and John investigating these earthquakes, because Lois and Chrissy went to go, investigate the mines, and there's a company here that's kind of looking over their mines. It's like, oh, are you really here for the X-Kryptonite? It's like, yeah, but I'm just mainly here to check out these earthquakes. So I'm like, hey, obviously that actress, most recently, being in, most recent thing I've seen her in is, Motherland Fort Salem. So I was like, hey, that's pretty dope to see you in this. It seems like, at least what that's set up to be, it seems like she's probably going to be a recurring character in this, but because I'm blanking on the character's name from Motherland. I want to say it's Petra, right? It's something like that. I'm blanking on it. But obviously working together again complicates things because it's like, right, he has Natalie back and being around Lois. Hell, he even found a photo of all three of them together, and it's just like, yeah, like he thought he dealt with it last season. I mean, that's why he decided to leave, because it's like, right, I can't be around you. Now this circumstance, it's like, right, it's good for Natalie to be around you, so I don't want to take that from her in any shape or form. So I'll deal with it in my own way. I'll kind of process and figure things out, and it won't be an issue. But it's definitely going to be complicated, especially because he brought her a drink and he knew exactly what kind of drink she wanted, and she's like, right, this is going to be a little awkward. But he's like, no, I'll figure it out. But the earthquake's intensified, and we see the people down below are getting attacked and potentially killed by something. And I love the last guy, like, basically blew up the mines just to be like, right, make sure everyone gets away from the mine. He wanted to make sure whatever was down there wasn't going to get out. Like I'd thrown it out there last episode, I was like, it seemed doomsday-ish. But once again, like, what we saw from the hand, it looked like armor. Like, it looked like a suit of armor when it came to the hands. It didn't seem like, not unless that's just like his skin. Like, it looked like armor. It didn't look like Doomsday's skin, but, you know, I don't know what else to really expect it to be. I don't know. I'm not well versed enough in comics to be like, oh, it's obviously got to be this. If it's something tied to Superman, it's most like, I don't know what to fully expect from it. But Homedude blew himself up along with like the mine just to make sure to stop it. I doubt that was enough to stop it. It's still probably trudging along, but it also seems like that's what they were looking for. Now, part of me is wondering, are we going to find out, like, yes, this company's doing this, but is she actually working for the company when she's saying like, oh, we found it and it's super powerful? Or are we dealing with a situation of she's secretly working with Anderson and he's trying to weaponize this to be what he needs it to be? You know, it could easily be one or the other. It could easily even be both to some extent. But because once again, just like how swarmy and like smug he is sometimes, you're just like, oh, like Anderson's kind of just got that smugness. You're just like, oh, I just want to punch you in the face. But also that might just be like, once again, that actor, his name's Ian Bohen. It might just be residuals from him playing Peter. I was like, yeah, Peter was smarmy like that too. You're just like, oh, you like, like he's such a smug bastard. He always thought he was in control, that you're just like, oh, I just want to punch you in the face with all like the nefarious like crap you're up to. So it just, I think maybe a little bit of that's kind of rubbing off, but. So there's that. Circling back to the Clark situation, he locks Morgan back up, and he's just like, right, you know, our mom, you know, he's like, yeah, she could have been your mom too. She believes that there's good in you. He's like, well, what about you, brother? He's like, no, but I want to. You know, so it's definitely going to be interesting. Like, so we're not done with Morgan. I wonder if we're going to ever tie back to Leslie or not, but definitely not done with Morgan. So going to be seeing a lot more of him going forward, and that's definitely going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Other elements to this episode is that apparently Lois is kind of getting in trouble. Like, a podcast is basically putting her on blast because of how she handled a case in the past. Like, there was a woman who was basically the head of a cult, but she was never indicted, but like, apparently Lois went super hard in the paint. She's like, I vetted all my sources, but it's like, oh, some words coming out that you like coerce some sources and stuff like that. She's like, no, that's not the case. The problem is now it's kind of going super viral. Now it is a situation of, okay, because of this, apparently one of your sources is recanting their statement, and she's like, no, that can't be possible. And so Chrissy gets her to finally open up, because Chrissy's still dealing with the aftermath of how Lois handled things last season about stuff related to her dad. It's like, right, I know how you can get when it comes to your family and how protective you can be rather than kind of being super upfront when you need to be, which, once again, it's extenuating circumstances. It wasn't just about her dad, which yes, but there's also, like, well, once again, like, her husband and his brother. So there was complications on the front when it came to all this, like, Morgan Edge stuff last season. But Lois opens up that the family member that was affected was her sister, Lucy. And I was like, that's interesting. She was drawn into a cult, and basically the leader of it kind of basically convinced her to find herself, and she downed a whole bunch of pills and almost drowned in the tub. It's like, luckily Lois found her in time. Another family wasn't lucky, so that's why Lois, like, had such a vendetta for this. But the thing is, Lucy won't talk to her. They haven't been on good terms since. They haven't been on good terms since the article came out, is based on what she said. So there are certain things in this that I'm like, I don't know if this is retconning certain. Well, I was like, no, it doesn't have to necessarily, because I was like, right, once again, we are talking about infinite Earths. We talked about, like, the multiverse collapse, because I'm about to say, like, certain aspects of this, I'm like, well, because that would mean, because we know Lucy of this continuity potentially because we met her in season 1 of Supergirl. Granted, she hasn't popped up since then. Let that sit there for a second. But, once again, like, everyone's lives are different, and we don't know the full scale of just how different things are. So, who knows, like, Lucy's life could be way different, because I mean, she ran the DEO for a while in season 1 of Supergirl, so it could be a thing of, like, her life, because she kind of followed more her father's footsteps. Obviously Lois steered away from her father's footsteps, but maybe because Lucy kind of leaned into that, but maybe in this new continuity she didn't. And there's also a part of my brain, not to draw this into the real world or anything, but part of me was like, do you think the reason why they're doing that specific thing of, like, oh, like, choosing that storyline, a cult and stuff like that, like, you don't think that's them kind of doing a little bit of a thing to the real situation, like, the Allison Mack of the situation, like that cult she got tied to? Like, I don't know if I'm probably reading too much into it, but the moment I'm hearing that, and my brain can't necessarily dissociate that, so I'm like, huh. Because it always makes me feel weird, because, like, I'll even admit, like, every time Smallville comes up now, I'm like, that's always going to be in the back of my mind. Like, the Allison Mack situation is always going to be in the back of my mind from now on. So, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm most likely reading too much into it, but I almost feel like that almost seems purposeful. But like I said, it could just be I mean, once again, cults are a big, real and scary thing. So it's not like a situation of, like, oh, that's the only thing. It's like, no, there have been plenty of instances and shows and documentaries that have covered cults, so it's not like it's that outside of the realm. But also, like, just how deadly a cult can be. Like, I think, especially for Lois, because she is this investigator, to have something like that happen to someone you're so close to and not being able to do anything, I think it's moments like that probably makes her feel a little powerless. Like, I think what that, and how we see that it potentially had a major impact on her and her sister's relationship, considering, like, her and Lucy potentially haven't talked since then. So I think maybe that speaks volumes. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting development. But even Chrissy was like, right, if it's your sister that recanted, like, this could blow back on you in more ways than one. And obviously it blowing back on Lois is going to blow back on Chrissy. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where that takes us. Circling back to the Clark thing really quickly, getting an explanation from his mom. The way she was making it sound like, and this is maybe my misunderstanding, is like, basically it sounds like it's an interdimensional parasite that he's connected to. Now, why that is the case, is that I was about to say, like, it can't be some multiverse collapsing stuff, because, like, it only just happened now. So I guess maybe when Natalie came through, something else came through or maybe something else already came through a while back, and it's just been buried underneath Smallville the entire time. Why is it affecting Clark now? Like, what changed? What shifted? Like I said, I assume it had to be something that happened when Natalie came through. So, like, something from that universe followed her here unbeknownst to her. and it latched on to Clark in particular. Now, why him? I don't know. Maybe because he's been out and about subsequently since, whereas Morgan's been locked up and just away, so I don't know. Some other storyline angles present in the episode, too, is like everything with Jonathan, where he was like, I guess like someone they knew that typically is kind of scrawny or whatever is kind of now benching like 350 or something. It's like Jonathan's like, yeah, that dude's totally juicing, because at first you almost see this almost insecure look on Jonathan's face. I almost expected Jonathan to get up and go like, no, I'm gonna do it next, just to try and prove himself. But he's like, no, there's just something off there. Like, the dude's got to be juicing. I don't know if that is the case. Obviously, like, he's still trying to find his place in everything on the football team. And he just feels like he's always kind of second fiddle and just never 100% stacks up. So, dealing with that. But then there's also the Natalie and, well, Jordan and Sarah situation, just things kind of being awkward and just things not clicking. And so Jordan's like, you know, asking Sarah like, oh, let's go to lunch and stuff. And Natalie sits down with them. And I think maybe this speaks volumes that in that moment, it's like Natalie's talking about like some of this stuff. And then Jordan just kind of feels like he's the third wheel in the situation. He's later on like, no, like, you go ahead. Because she's like, oh, I had plans with Natalie. I totally forgot. He's like, oh, yeah. Which is going to make you feel a certain way, because it's like, right, they haven't really spent a lot of time together since she got back from the camp thing. And then also it's like, right, like, we made these plans and you just started talking to Natalie and we're kind of dating and you just kind of threw me to the wayside. So it's going to make you feel away. But Natalie talks to her about it. It's like, right, whatever it is, you need to talk to Jordan about it or get better at lying and hiding it, because whatever it is, it's super obvious. Because she talked about, like, right, do you ever have a secret that, you know, you can't tell anyone because it will change things? She's like, yeah. But she's like, it's like, how do you handle it? She's like, well, my situation, I know it's quite different from yours, so. But it also is pretty interesting, her being, like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, her being the gearhead that she is, that she's able to fix up that car that Kyle bought and everything. So that was actually pretty dope. I'm interested to see, like, what they do with Natalie going forward with everything. Obviously, the adjustment period of just kind of, like, trying to fit in and have a normal life coming from the circumstances she came from. But later on, Sarah talks to Jordan, and she admits, at first I was like, did you, like, something happened between you and somebody at the camp? And it's like, oh, yeah, that's totally what happened. She's like, yeah, I kissed someone. And Jordan was like, wait, do you want to date that person? She was like, no, it just kind of happened. And I was like, she's like, it didn't mean anything. I was like, the problem is, you waiting till now to tell him kind of makes it seem like there was more to it, because you know, but it's also, because part of me is also wondering, like, could that be because also part of me is like with the Natalie thing too, I was like, oh, are you actually figuring out your sexuality and you're just not sure how to really broach that conversation? Like, maybe you're thinking like it meant nothing, but maybe it's like, oh, maybe, you know, I mean, sexuality is such a large spectrum that it's like, you know, maybe she's discovering like, oh, I actually like girls, or maybe she's like, I like girls and boys, and maybe it's a thing of, maybe she ends up finding out she's just not into monogamy, you know, she might be one of those people like, I don't want to just be tied down to one person. I don't know. That's definitely going to be interesting to see what that ends up being. Like, just like I said, I get, like, her saying, like, oh, it's nothing, I kissed someone. It's, once again, but it's also your teenagers, so, like, you kissing someone else is kind of a big deal. I mean, a kiss is a lot more favorable than, like, oh, yeah, I slept with this person. It's also, like, your teenagers, so they're not trying to, well, obviously they're broaching that conversation a little bit with Jonathan and his girlfriend last episode, but in this case, they're not broaching that with Sarah and Jordan, but so things are kind of a little sideways here. So, I mean, it's sad because that's why Jordan wanted to help his dad in the first place, because he felt like things were awkward between him and Sarah, so he just wanted to feel useful at some point. Like, he just needed something that would also kind of distract him, so. I wonder, and it's something I brought up during my trailer discussion. I am curious, are they going to lean more into the whole Superboy angle of it all, considering he is getting stronger and he wanted to help his dad out. Especially because John has no intentions of suiting up again. He's putting like the still suit behind him and dedicating all his time to being a father to Natalie, trying not to get mixed up in all this stuff that could put him in danger and kind of end up taking him away from her. So Clark would need backup, especially considering like the government isn't backing him up either. So it's like, right, you're going to need some local backup, and Jordan might be filling that role. We'll definitely have to wait and see. But other elements to the episode are I was wondering, like, I think I finally recognized where I recognized the dude from. If I'm not mistaken, the actor who plays Daniel, I'm like, weren't you in Batwoman? Like, wasn't he one of the bad people that was a part of the Crows and stuff like that? One of the guys responsible for Luke's dad, if I'm not mistaken. Because he was also on Charmed as well. I believe that's the actor, I think, because I kept looking at the dude who plays Daniel. I'm like, why does he look so familiar? I think that's him, if I'm not mistaken. So I was like, oh, obviously playing two different characters. It's fine. Because, no, I was like, no, because that was... And then I won't worry about it. Like, but I think that's that actor. But turns out he's bailing out of the race because he got a job opportunity. I thought the timing was interesting. Especially because that got the current mayor, Dean, is like, oh, competition and blah, blah, blah. It's like, considering everything you did and you got the nerve to be all smug and stuff, and it's just like both Kyle and Lana want to smack that smug look off your face. So, but with Daniel backing out because he has a job opportunity and his family's been struggling for a while now, and he wants to jump on it. I mean, a lot of people in Smallville have been struggling, because even Lana's like, if it wasn't for the settlement from Morgan's like company, this town would be even deeper underwater, you know? And so they're trying to find other candidates, but it's kind of like a nope, nope, nope. And at that moment I'm like, well, what about Lana? And Kyle actually went off and got signatures at the fire department for who would back her up. You know, it's like, right, no one loves Smallville more than she does, so she can do it. But she's also like, right, I kind of jumped the gun on that, and I've also filled out the paperwork and stuff. He's like, oh my God, my wife's about to be mayor. She's like running for mayor. He's like, then I get to be the first dude. And I'm like, I really like that. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see, because I think it makes sense for Lana to fill that role, because I think just like Martha kind of filled that role of being kind of the heart of Smallville, Lana's kind of filling that role as well, and I think it makes sense for her to be filling, well, for that to happen. I think if Clark had stuck around, he'd kind of, but to be fair, he's been going for many, many, many years, so it's not the same. And I don't think, with everything he's doing, like, even if the situation called for it, I don't think he'd jump on it, because he's already got too much other stuff going on to really be mayor of Smallville. It makes sense, considering Lana stayed here, she raised her entire family here, she knows this town like the back of her hand, so it's definitely going to be interesting to see, especially because Kyle did touch on, like, well, the thing is, even though it's a small town, politics are still politics, and that world can get nasty. So what that turns into, what that ends up being during this mayor race, it's going to be interesting. So just a lot of really interesting things to keep in mind. I'm curious to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.